Very good afternoon to you all here at the Legal Shebeen community. I would like to welcome you all to our first ever Legal Writing Skills Workshop. I am Unoktula Ngwenya, the General Secretary of the Legal Shebeen. Today we're joined by someone who needs absolutely no introduction as his accolades speak for themselves. He holds an LLB degree cum laude from the University of Pretoria as well as a PhD in the Department of Jurisprudence also from the University of Pretoria. His PhD thesis is entitled The Jurisprudence of Steve Biko, a study in race, law, and power in the afterlife of colonial apartheid. He is the acting head of the Department of Jurisprudence and was recently promoted to Associate Professor earlier on this year. It is with great pleasure to welcome Professor Modiri.
Thank you for having me and for asking me to come and talk a little bit about academic legal research and writing, and academic legal writing, or really just academic writing and research in the context of law, or being a law student and later being a legal academic or a legal professional. I'm just getting some feedback on someone's mic, if they could switch it off. I don't know who it is, but if you can just switch off the mic so we don't get the feedback. Okay, that's much better. Okay, so we're going to be talking about academic legal research and writing. And there's quite a bit to go through in 30 minutes, so we won't go through all of this, but hopefully what we do here will just give you a pointer or a refresher on some of the key principles of academic writing in law as law students, not specifically UP law, but in legal academia more generally. Hoping that you will then take this further in your own growth as a writer when you advance in different levels. And we'll talk a little bit about different types of writing and different levels of writing that are required of you during your journey or during your career. But what I want to try and focus on today are what I would say are some of the key principles that would apply to all kinds of writing that people do. But just to say, there are many books out there on tips and tricks on academic legal writing. Those are sometimes very useful. One very useful book is by Umberto Eco, entitled How to Write a Thesis. So there are many texts that you can look at to deepen this discussion. So in the next really 23 minutes or a little bit more, we'll talk a little bit about academic legal research and writing. And the issues that I'm going to discuss firstly is why do we write? Why write? What's the aim or purpose of writing? The second thing I'm going to discuss is what should you do before you write? What are the things that are necessary before you sit down and write? What do you need to do before writing? Then we'll say something about different types of academic legal writing. What are the different genres or forms of academic writing in law? Then we're going to look at three other things. We're going to look at what are the elements of good written work. So say your piece of writing is a good piece of writing, what needs to be there? What needs to be evidenced or illustrated in that text? Finally, we'll look at the basic structure of written work. And then if we have time, we'll look at some pointers on the writing process. And those of you who are currently doing legal philosophy or JUR 310 will also note that at the back of your study guide are some reading and writing guidelines, some of which are going to be reflected in the discussion, some of which will be helpful for you to think about with your essays. Those of you who are doing fourth-year dissertations as well will see some pointers that we've already seen in some of the slides or lectures that we have. Okay, so let's start. Why do we write? You write mainly for essentially four basic purposes. One is to answer a question, either the question that's posed in an assessment or the question that arises from your research or from a research project. So you want to answer a question. There's some unresolved issue. There's something that needs to be figured out or understood. Secondly, is because you want to prove a point. You want to put forward a proposition. You want to make an argument. You want to position yourself either in agreement or disagreement with a particular line of reasoning or line of argument. In the case of a case note, you want to position yourself in relation to that specific judgment or that specific history of judgments. In the case of an article, you want to situate yourself in relation to a certain argument in the literature, in the scholarship of the particular field. Thirdly, we write because we want to engage in a discussion or a debate. We want to share our viewpoint, share our perspective, share our ideas with others. Finally, we want to solve a problem. We want to address a gap. There's something missing, something misunderstood, something unheard, something not being attended to that you want to bring to the fore. So you're either answering a question, proving a point, engaging in a discussion or a debate, or solving a problem. Or often, the more advanced the writing is, all three. But there's a deeper element to writing. One is because it deepens your own understanding. It deepens your understanding of the specific legal or social or political problem that you're trying to explore. It also deepens your understanding of the human reality, of the world, of ideas. It gives you a depth, deeper understanding and deeper knowledge of an issue or a problem or a worldly crisis or issue. Secondly, and this is especially when we're looking at dissertations and theses and journal articles, you want to contribute to knowledge, which means you recognize that there have been others and are others doing work in your field or in the specific field, but you want to suggest that your work offers a contribution to knowledge. You want to add to the body of knowledge of human understanding on a specific topic. You want your voice to be heard, but most importantly, you want your research outcomes, the knowledge that you have, to be part of the archive or canon of a field. You want to offer a contribution to knowledge. And thirdly, you want to communicate with a wider society. So this is what makes writing unique. You can think about many things and study and learn about many things, but what makes writing different is because you're taking that knowledge that you've acquired and you're communicating it to a wider audience. So the writing is not, in a way, about yourself, but it's about whoever you're writing to. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get there. Okay, so that's why we write. We write because there's an audience or there's a purpose behind our writing. That's the main thing. Okay. What do we do before we write? First, we plan. You plan your writing, whether it's an assignment or a thesis or a dissertation or a journal article. You plan. You plan at two levels. One, you plan out a work schedule. How do you look at your work schedule? You look at the due date or the final date for the submission of that item. When is it due? And you plan backwards. And you make time for everything that includes reading, drafting, editing, revisions, comments, and the final version, right? So you plan backwards from the due date. The only thing that should appear on the day before the due date is submission on your work schedule. Right? You should not be doing anything at the last minute. You need to be planning your time. You need to be planning your study or your piece of writing. And how do you plan it? You look at what you need to do. Either you've got 5 chapters if it's a dissertation, or 5 sections if it's a journal article. So you plan section by section. What do I need to do? What are the easy sections? What are the difficult sections? What are the readings that I'm supposed to complete? And you make sure that you plan your time appropriately. Your scheduling or your planning will, of course, depend on the nature, the size of the written project. Sometimes the due date is your own date. If you're planning to simply submit something to a journal, then it's whenever you're ready. But often with an assignment or a thesis or a dissertation, there's a specific date on which it is due. Secondly, you also plan in terms of formalities. So make sure if you're submitting to a journal article to the Stellenbosch Law Review, or if you're submitting a dissertation to your supervisor, or if you're submitting a essay to the PSLR, whatever the case might be, that you've looked at what the formalities are. What are the referencing? What are the page limits or word limits? Okay, because that's also going to help you plan your time. You've got to know the formalities and the technical requirements of the written work in advance so that you don't go off and prepare your written work that doesn't meet those formalities. If the word limit is 8,000 words, you shouldn't be writing or planning for 18,000 words. Similarly, if the minimum word length that's required is 2,000 words, then you shouldn't be thinking of writing 500 words. So the formalities, the word limits, and the referencing requirements and the due dates also will affect your scheduling and will affect your planning. So the first thing you do before you start writing is you sit down with a calendar and you write what you need to be doing, working backwards from the due date. Secondly, most essentially and most importantly, what do we do before we write? We read. Reading is the essential starting point of a written project or of a writing project, unless you're writing fiction. And in my view, even if you're writing fiction or even if you're writing poetry, even if you're writing a biography about yourself, you should actually have read something. You should have read other biographies. You should have read other works of poetry. You should have read the works of theorists and critics of that field so that you can understand how you're going to approach your project. But in the case of academic legal writing, you make sure that you have got a good understanding of the literature in the field. But reading is important generally for somebody who sees themselves as a writer or somebody who wants to write. One, it widens your knowledge. It deepens and widens your knowledge, your comprehension of a topic or an issue, and it also widens your vocabulary. It exposes you to ways of expressing oneself, to new words, terms, concepts, and ideas. Okay, so it widens your knowledge, and that makes reading an important starting point. Reading also enables connection, understanding, and empathy. It helps you understand how your work or how this argument is related to that argument. It helps you see how that field is related to that field, how that discipline is connected to that discipline, but it also helps how you are connected to certain people in the field, right? Where do I sit in relation to these different authors in the field? Reading also enables empathy, depending on what you're reading. Reading activates your critical capacities. When you are reading, you're forced to evaluate, you're forced to judge, you're forced to weigh, you're forced to look at to assess the quality, the depth, the persuasiveness, the convincingness of that argument, right? So it helps increase your capacity for judgment, for evaluation, for understanding. Reading also improves your mental health, it helps you de-stress, it improves your cognitive functioning, and so on and so forth, okay? So reading is very important. But when you're reading for a writing assignment or a writing project, two things are necessary. First, you need to read widely. Before you start with your topic, you need to read widely. If you're going to study a specific aspect of, let's say, the law of defamation, then you need to study defamation law terms, concepts. You need to study the literature. You need to study the case law. So you need an overview of the literature. That's why we read widely. You want to see what's happening in the field. What's the latest in trends and developments in the field? What are the main perspectives? What are the main approaches? What are the main lines of argument? That's what reading widely helps you do. It helps you map the discourse. You might be familiar with that term. Discourse mapping. It helps you understand who are the main authorities in the field, what are the main arguments, what are the main schools of thought, what are the main approaches, and what is happening in the literature. What are the missing gaps? What are the topics that have been over-discussed? What are the topics that need to be discussed, okay? And then you narrow your focus depending on what your jurisdiction is, what your emphasis is. Are you looking at types of defamation? Are you looking at defamation from a comparative perspective? Are you focused on damages for defamation? That is then the second element of reading. That's reading closely. Why do we now read closely? So now you've seen the lay of the land, you've read widely, you've understood the state of the literature in that field. Now you are narrowing down the focus. You're identifying your specific topic in that large field where there's a million things happening. You identifying and narrowing down your focus, your specific emphasis. But reading closely then also adds something else. It now gives you the detail. So remember, when you're reading widely, you're getting a broad overview of American defamation law, German defamation law, whatever the case may be. But now you're getting in-depth detail. You're going through the specific authoritative case law. You're reading the specific authoritative figures of scholars in that field. You're looking at the specific applicable legislation in that field. Right? Now you're narrowing down the focus, but you're also gaining detail and you're gaining depth. You cannot write anything if you are not reading, and reading seriously and reading carefully. The reason we start with reading widely is precisely so that you don't fall into the trap of simply reading just to find what you're looking for, grabbing a paragraph and closing the text. You need a full context of the text. So in most cases, you need to read the full literature, the full pieces of work. So now, where do you start when you read? Well, there are a number of ways you can do it. You need to be looking essentially for the most recent source, the latest, almost up-to-date source. Why? Because it's going to reflect most of the literature in the field. It's going to reflect the developments in the field. It's going to show you which positions have been discredited and which positions are still applicable. Okay. In the case of case law, it's going to show you which cases have been superseded or overruled, and it's going to show you which are still good law. Okay. You can also look at the most comprehensive source. So an encyclopedia, a handbook, or a source book. Textbooks you can get away with in your undergraduate assignments. In postgraduate study, you can look at a textbook for yourself as a refresher, just to get a good understanding of what's going on. But a textbook is not an academic source because it's not written for other scholars. It's written to give students a basic understanding of a topic. So please avoid overusing textbook. You want to look at encyclopedias. You want to look at what they call the research handbooks. You want to look at the surveys or updates in a field. Okay, because those are scholarly texts that are engaging the literature. Okay, they give you a comprehensive covering of all the issues. You can also look at the most authoritative source. So if you're working in property law, one might argue that then you must look at the work of, say, André van der Walt. If you're looking at African human rights, then you look at the work of Frans Fanon. If you're looking at decolonizing the law, you look at the work of Tshepo Madlingozi. If you're looking at Ubuntu philosophy, you read the work of Mogobera Moses. Those are just examples. So you go to the most authoritative source. You go to the people or the institution or the scholars who have done the most extensive study of a field, the ones who've written the most, the ones who are cited the most, the ones who are listened to the most, whatever the case might be. Okay, so remember, what are you looking for when you're looking at the sources that you need to start reading? You're looking for the recent up-to-date sources, you're looking for comprehensive sources, and you're looking for authoritative sources. You're also looking for the most relevant source. If you are talking about the African human rights system, then you need to look for books on the African human rights system, not the American or European system. If you're doing comparative literature, then you start there, okay? So relevance means how closely related to the topic it is. And that's especially when you get to the reading closely part. Okay, so to quickly summarize, you read widely first, you get a lay of the land. You look for a textbook or an encyclopedia, you look for some source that helps you understand what the state of the literature is. Once you have a good understanding of what's happening, that helps you to narrow down your reading. If everyone can just switch off their mics, please, I'm getting some feedback. Okay, thank you. So reading widely is to get an overview, to see who are the main figures in the field, what are the main schools of thought, what are the main approaches, what are the main positions, what are the main authoritative views in the field. Then you narrow down the topic and the focus. You're getting the detail and the depth. You're looking at the most recent source, the most comprehensive source, the most authoritative source, or the most relevant source. Normally, all four. Remember, you need to look for the local sources before you look at the foreign sources, unless your study is about comparative law. But even if it's comparative, you're comparing something with something. So you start from your local jurisdiction or perspective, and then you look for the comparative approaches. Just a quick warning on comparative law. You need to know why you're comparing, and you need to be able to choose the correct jurisdictions to compare with. Okay, you don't just simply say you're going to do Kenya and the US and England and Germany. You need to establish the purpose for comparison, and then you need to decide or justify the chosen comparators. Okay, but I suggest you have another session on comparative sources. Local versus foreign is very important. Okay, if you are writing about racism in South Africa, be very careful of using sources from other countries or other experiences. Okay, because when you're talking about a historically specific experience, then you need to make sure that your sources are relevant to the specific reality or experience that you're exploring. Okay, if you're writing about racism in South Africa, then be careful about using, say, examples in Palestine or examples in Germany or other places. Some of the examples are generalizable. Some of the information is not generalizable, because race and racialization operates differently in different countries. The same goes for gender or any topic that you want to discuss. Okay, if you want to talk about protest or violence, if you want to make sure that the sources that you are using are relevant and applicable to the topic and the area and the focus area that you are discussing. When you're looking at a topic, you start with the primary sources, the case law, the legislation, then you get to the secondary sources, okay, the books and articles. Remember what I just said about scholarly books versus textbooks. Student textbooks are not scholarly works. At master's and doctoral level, we do not want to see you citing or overusing textbooks, student textbooks. But the final function of reading is to situate yourself. It's for you to think about what is your voice, what is your intervention, what is your contribution to this, all this information that you've seen. It's your attempt to process the information and to situate yourself appropriately. Look at issues of style. How do the authors express themselves, argue? Some of them speak in the first person, others speak in the third, and so forth, okay? Develop your own style. So don't just look at what the argument is, look at how the author is writing, how the author is elaborating their argument. And finally, look at questions of form, structure, how the authors that you are reading organize and present their ideas. Before writing, then the final thing you need to do is you need to find a topic. Normally, the topic is set by the assignment, or it can be your own choice in the case of a dissertation or an article. Either way, you need to identify a problem for investigation and unpacking. You see that order? After you have done enough reading, you will be able to identify a problem, a gap, a controversy. You'll be able to see what is an interesting or timely intervention in the field that you want to write about or the topic you want to explore. Okay, so we only find a topic, or we find a research problem only after we have done sufficient reading of the key authorities or key sources in the field. Okay. Then there are obviously many types of academic or legal writing. Normally, there's the essay or the article or the journal article. There's the case note, which is basically like an article, but what makes it unique is that it's concentrated around elaborating a discussion of a specific case or development in case law around a specific topic. And then there's the so-called dissertation and thesis that is for postgraduate study, for the conferment of a master's or doctoral degree. Different countries actually have different words. We talk of a master's dissertation and a doctoral thesis, but in other places they speak of a master's thesis and a doctoral dissertation. But writing also extends to every time you communicate words and information to other people. So it includes emails, it includes letters of applications, and of course, other professional documents, which we will not talk about today, particulars of claim, heads of argument, letters of advice, internal memoranda, and so forth. Those we will not be looking at. But the principles of good writing, you will see, apply to all of these different genres of writing. Just to maybe clarify an important difference, with a master's degree, we want to see that you have a critical understanding of the existing literature. In other words, that you have mastered the field. You understand the key aspects of the debate in the field, that you have a good understanding of the literature in the field. With a doctorate, we want to see an original and significant contribution to knowledge. In other words, at doctoral level, you are adding important insights and knowledge to the field. You're not simply telling us what a whole lot of and commenting on what a whole lot of voices say, but you're putting forward a major thesis or proposition about your field, right? You're giving us an original contribution. So those are the types of legal writing. Before I get to the kind of format or basic structure of these formats, let's go back again to the elements of good written work. You can think of this as a kind of checklist for your writing and for your written work. Firstly, good written work is based on reading and research. Good written academic work is well-informed, well-evidenced, and well-substantiated. It is not a treatise of your opinions on matters, right? It's a process of testing your opinions by locating them within the literature. This is very important. Academic writing is based on reading and based on research. Secondly, good written work is clear and focused, because remember, you are not writing to or for yourself. You are writing for an audience. And who is that audience? The audience can be your lecturer, your examiner. It can be a wider audience. It can be a specialist audience. So remember, if you are writing to other specialists in the law of contract, there are certain things you don't need to tell them. You can get straight to the intricacies or complexities of the matter. If you're writing to a generalist legal audience, then you can dispense with the legal terminology, but you need to give a bit more information. If you're writing to examiners, you need to show that you have a basic understanding of certain things and build up to your argument, okay? So you need to focus on the purpose, we've looked at that, but also the audience. Who are you writing to, okay? And that is going to inform how you structure your work. So good written work is clear and focused. What does this fundamentally mean? It means that your work is organized around a central idea or a golden thread. That the way you've structured your written work and the arguments that you make, everything that you write, is in the right place because it relates to the central idea or the central argument. It's the fundamental question of what are you trying to say? If you find yourself not being able to explain to a friend or a family member or a colleague, so ask you, what are you writing about? You need to be able to immediately say, I'm writing about ABC. I'm writing about the limitations of a positivistic approach to understanding human rights violation. If you cannot say that, if that sentence cannot encapsulate your study, then it probably means you're either all over the place, your argument is overbroad, or that there's vagueness. Clear, focused, and specific central ideas frame your study. Normally one central idea, and everything else should be subordinate to the central idea. The central idea is the core fundamental point, the why and the what of your argument. So good written work is based on reading and research, number one. Number two, it's clear and focused and specific about what it's trying to convey. Thirdly, good written work is coherent. There's a proper arrangement of ideas. Everything is in the right place. When you read your work, you need to make sure that everything follows logically. You cannot, for example, give a definition of a concept at the end of your study. It needs to be in the beginning if that concept is going to be discussed throughout. So there needs to be a proper, logical, and sequential arrangement and presentation of your ideas as you build up to the central idea or the central focus. There also needs to be helpful signposts and helpful transitions between the sections and chapters in your work. So depending on the length of your work, if you're writing a 3-page piece, then we don't need too many signposts and transition. If you're writing a 50-page dissertation, then you need to link back. You need to say, in the previous chapter, we did this. In this chapter, we're going to do this. And at the conclusion, you need to say, as indicated, the following things that I promised to do have been done in the following way. When you get to the middle, you need to say, as referred to above, or so you need to link all the different elements of your study. There needs to be a logical sequence to how you present your ideas. And there needs to be markers that remind the reader, where are we going? Okay, so if you think of signposts in the same way as you're traveling or driving on the way, that shows you that you're on the right track. Okay, so you need signposts and you need transitions. You need to show, and you also need to make sure that when you've made an argument or a proposition in one section, that you don't then repeat it in another section. You need to make sure that the ideas are self-contained and that they progress in a logical and clear sequence. Fourth, good written work is properly substantiated with supporting material. It's not simply making an assertion, but it means that you are making use of sufficient, relevant, and persuasive sources, examples, and evidence. So there needs to be supporting material. You need to be able to explain why you say what you say. Why is X wrong and Y correct? And that's all developed in your sources and in your reading. Okay? So it has to be properly substantiated. Substantiation, evidence, and reading also helps you to not get carried away. Okay? Because it grounds you in information that is known or that has been studied, that has been proven, that has been debated, that has been tested. The reason why we insist that you base your engagement on academic sources is because, of course, academic sources have been peer reviewed. All right. Good written work makes use of appropriate and accurate use of language, terms, and concepts. Your point of view is clearly expressed. It's aligned to the audience and purpose of your written work. There are no cliches. There's no jargon. There's no wordiness. There's no repetition. There's no slang. There's just clear, simple, and good English. There's no unnecessary Latin terms where foreign, in other words, non-English terms are used. Then there needs to be followed by a translation of that term. You only use non-English terms when they are necessary for the purpose and audience of the study. Finally, good written work shows attention and care. From the referencing, to the spelling, to the grammar, to the punctuation, to the formatting, to the font, to the page numbers, shows that you have been attentive to what you've been doing, that your written work has gone through multiple drafts, multiple edits, that you have read through it carefully, but most importantly, that you respect your audience. When I read work that is shoddy or sloppy, my first instinct is that this person does not respect the craft of writing, does not respect the discipline that they want to contribute to, but does not respect the reader who is taking time to engage the written work. That includes us as markers, okay? So shows attention and care. What does it mean for good written work to show attention and care? It also means it's not rushed. It's not rushed, it's well thought out. You're not trying to play games. You are carefully taking us through an argument or a proposition. I was going to say a little bit about the basic structure of a written work, but I don't want to do that because it's actually a picture that I want to show. But basically, all written work has an introduction which sets out the topic, puts forward the main argument to be made or problem to be investigated, and gives an overview of the article or the dissertation or whatever the case may be. The only difference is that with an article, it's different sections, and with a dissertation, it's different chapters. Same with a case note. Then there's a body to each piece of written work. The body is what some people also call the meat, because it is made up of different sections or different chapters, depending on the form. And it logically builds the argument in support of the main thesis or the main argument. It's in the body where we find the discussion, the examples, the elaborations, the illustration of the argument. The body must logically build towards the conclusion and resolution of the research problem or topic or issue that you are investigating. And then there's a conclusion. The function of a conclusion is not to introduce anything new, but to wrap up the argument, to give recommendations, observations, to complete the circle of the study or the article or the assignment, and to mirror the introduction. Remember that in the introduction, you say you're going to do certain things. In the body, you do those things. And then in the conclusion, you confirm that you have done them. Okay? Some last pointers on the writing process. As I've indicated, writing is a complex process. It takes time. Your first written piece will not be as good as after you've written a 10th article or a 20th article. Okay? So writing is a practice that you develop over and over time. Okay, so firstly, as I said, with the writing process involves planning and researching, keeping up with new developments in the field, making sure that the sources you're working with are the sources that are going to help you to make the argument that you need to make. In writing, we do not take shortcuts. We take time, and that's why planning is important. You take shortcuts because you have not planned your time carefully. Then, when you are writing, please remember to draft as you read. So don't wait to read every single thing about the topic and then start writing. Once you have a good sense of what's happening, you start developing, writing, putting together your arguments, going back and forth with the sources. So you draft as you read, and you also work on different parts of the text. No written work is completed in one go. You cannot sit down and write your essay all at once. You do parts of it, bits and pieces of it. You go back, you revise, you edit, you fix, you clean up, and so forth. So it's drafting as you go. Drafting means that there are going to be several drafts that you need. And the more advanced, for example, if it's a doctorate or a master's or even a dissertation, there's going to be multiple drafts that you need to work on. Revision is part of the drafting process. So it's not that you submit something and then your supervisor or editor, whoever, just circles one or two things to fix and then it's published. Okay? There's going to be a revision process. And a revision process is where experts or interested peers give you some insight into the persuasiveness, the quality, and the presentation of your argument, okay? So there's has to be multiple revision. Revision focuses on content, form, and logic of the argument, right? So when I say revise something, I'm not simply saying fix one or two footnotes. We're saying to you, rethink your argument, evaluate your argument, go back and say, is this convincing? Is this strong enough? Have I used enough sources here? Have I used the correct expression here? Is this concept correctly defined? Am I using the language optimally? Are the footnotes proper? Okay, so revision is about both proofreading and proof reasoning, and it might involve minor or major rewriting depending on the quality of the draft. Okay, so the drafting process is a messy process. You write as you go, you're trying to figure out what you're doing. You are updating your readings and updating your writing, your drafting. Once you have a final draft, then you start revising, editing, waxing, cleaning. The first few revisions and edits of a full draft, focus on the substance only. You leave the footnotes and everything, you read the thing, and you make sure that you are hitting all the right notes, that you are making a convincing, persuasive argument, that you're setting out a clear position. Once you're satisfied with that, then you start looking at the referencing, the grammar, the spelling, the wording, and so forth. So we're looking at multiple layers of drafts, not just one draft, but multiple rereading. And that has to be part of your planning. So just to go back, when you do your planning, you need to make time for editing and revising, okay? Something that most students do not understand, and that is a serious problem for us, The first draft is for your eyes only. The first draft of anything, and I mean anything, is for your eyes only. Your supervisor or the editor of a journal should not see your first draft. Your first draft is for you to say, I've put something strong together, and now I want to clean it up and work on it and develop it and evaluate it and assess it and critique it. Your supervisor should never get your first draft. They should get the second, third, fourth draft. Once you've reworked and rethought your position and your argument and the presentation of your argument. Remember, as you're working through different versions, to manage your version. So if it's chapter 1, draft 2, make sure that you are managing your drafts properly so that you make sure that you don't lose any information that you've added or any corrections and comments that you've received. Manage your versions properly, and of course also manage your files properly. Either put your information on a cloud, email it to yourself, put it on a memory stick, whatever the case may be, but make sure you don't lose your information. Then do not discard anything. Do not delete anything for life. Create a folder where you put all the information that you have deleted from a document. And you can put that and say, this is deleted from chapter 4, and put everything in that document so that you can return to some of that information to fill any gaps that you identify in the drafting, editing, and revision process. Then you also need to edit your work. And editing, again, means carefully looking at your work to see that you have presented your arguments clearly and properly. So planning, researching, multiple drafts, revisions, edits, and then looking at your final draft for submission. And even then, depending on the nature of, for example, if it's a master's, that's also not the end of the road, okay? Because your examiners are going to come back with more comments for you to fix, okay? If it's a journal article, then you're going to get comments from the reviewers before, after you have gotten comments from the editors, okay? So all of this is to say that the writing process requires time, requires focus and seriousness, and requires care. And you can only become a good writer if you are attentive to all the aspects of what makes written work a good piece of written work. And it also will show that you respect your audience and you respect the discipline that you are trying to participate in. Okay, so I don't want to rehash anything now, and I don't want to go on any further because we have only 14 minutes for questions. But writing requires time, it requires focus, and it requires attentiveness. Those are the essential elements of being a good writer and of writing well. Finally, good writing requires practice. It requires taking time to really find your voice, find your style, find a form that will make you a good communicator to a wider audience, depending on who that audience is. Because of time, I'm just going to stop there. I hope what we've offered you gives you some sense of the writing process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. We would just like to open up the floor to some questions. I think roughly 3 to 5 questions with 10 more minutes. So if anyone has questions, you may just raise up your hand and unmute yourself. Alternatively, you may just use the chat on the side. So just 10 minutes.
Any questions, any comments, any specific queries on the presentation?
Hi, Prof. I have a question. I raised my hand, so I was just waiting to be recognized. Can I ask?
Is that Nokwazi?
No, Nokwazi just said something in the chat bar. It's Mulate.
Oh, okay. You can go ahead, and then Nokwazi can then ask a question.
Okay, cool. So my question pertains to something that you did mention, but I just think it's a little necessary for me to ask again because it's something I battle with personally. So I saw a tweet that says that the academic version of wash the dishes as you're cooking is reference as you write. And my question is, do you have like any tips and tricks to not get overly overly involved in trying to dot your I's and cross your T's while you're writing? So just really getting the draft out without overly concentrating on making sure that the referencing is perfect, every line makes sense and it's coherent and that sort of thing. Because that can be quite time constraining, and before you know it, you haven't made much progress, but you have one really great paragraph and you've spent quite a bit of time on that. Thank you.
Nokwazi, go ahead. And yes, I will send the slides after this event for anybody who would like to look at them again. Nokwazi, go ahead.
Good evening, Prof, and everyone else. Regarding with, let's say I'm writing a dissertation and I already have a viewpoint or stance on the topic that I've selected. Is it advisable for me to be biased in my research and kind of like swerve more to case law that favors my arguments? Or should I include conflicting judgments, conflicting arguments from different sources before I make my own opinion?
Okay, I'm happy to take a good third question. The question is, how many external sources would a good body of legal work require for third-year jurisprudence? Okay. Tips for struggling to maintain golden thread. Okay, let's get through some of those. All right. Yes, it is important to reference as you go, but at least you should keep a good record of your sources. There's nothing worse than when you're finished or you've completed your proposition or argument, then you cannot find where you got the sources, or you've put things in quotation marks, but you're no longer sure who it is or what's happening. What I normally do is, if I quote something or use a source, I'll just put in square brackets the name of the text and the page number. So I'll say Kumalo Heavy 20, or the first word of the book, just so that I can be able to then go back and put the footnotes in place. But please make sure you keep a record of every single one of your sources. One of the things that causes plagiarism and rushed work is when you've done everything and you've lost all your sources. So please make sure that it's part of what I talked about, managing your sources. Make sure that you don't lose the references that you use and develop some kind of system for doing it. It is always best to just put the basic references there, and then you'll complete the references at the end. Put the footnotes there and just put a short little shorthand or abbreviated reference, and then you will then clean it up at the end. So that's very important. But yes, when you are writing, you should obviously make sure that you're not constantly making big mistakes, because then the draft is going to come out. It's not going to be a workable draft. You need to put together a good draft, which will obviously be incomplete. There'll be some errors, but don't constantly reread paragraph after paragraph. Plan your time. If today you're working on a specific chapter, then put that chapter together, get the introduction out, put the body together, go back to your planning, see what you need to do. And then at the end, you can clean it up. What I do, depending on what you've mentioned, a dissertation, because it's a very big piece of writing. So you also don't want to write 100 pages and then have to re-edit them all completely. At the end of the day of writing, on a writing day, when I'm finished writing, then I'll look at the stuff that I've written and quickly, 20 or so minutes, clean it up a little bit. If there's immediate spelling errors, errors in punctuation and grammar, to quickly clean those at the end of the day. And then the next day, do the same thing. So it all depends on the size of the project. But yes, don't get bogged down in every little thing that you need to do. make sure that you get a draft out there, but it should be a strong draft. It should, from the get-go, you should be working slowly, carefully, and clearly. But don't focus yet on language and grammar in the beginning, and keep a record of your references. Then on the question of coming into a study or a research project with a viewpoint, look, it all depends. My starting point is that you will, if the evidence and the literature and the reality is against your viewpoint, then you need to be open to changing your view. Okay, so the whole process of research is exactly to enable you to test your argument. So if you hold position A, and then you need to look for sources that support position A, evidence, statistics, arguments, case law, whatever the case might be, depending on the assignment, to find the strongest plausible version of your argument. Okay, so don't be so blinded by your proposition that you also avoid contradictory evidence. If there's contradictory evidence, you need to ask yourself, can I explain these contradictions away? Or is there a stronger counter argument? But if you find yourself completely on another planet when your sources are going in one direction, that's a good time to sit down and reevaluate whether you are holding the right position or not. Okay, so it's a balance. Nobody comes to anything objectively because none of us are empty vessels. Okay, we all come with our experiences, our views, our values, our commitments. But we need to make sure that the way we express, develop our argument is justifiable, plausible, convincing, and most importantly, persuasive. But you have to be able to change your mind if the evidence in the literature is completely opposed to your proposition, unless you're in the natural sciences and you have the support and funding to study whether the earth is flat or round. But for the most part, if there's almost no support, no statistic, no evidence, no example, no book, no case law that supports your view, then you need to be prepared to change it or modify it or find another way of presenting your argument. The question on, well, for the third year assignment, I'm just going to go there. Well, for a third year essay, 2 or 3 really good additional sources that speak to the topic are often sufficient. The reason we require students to do external research is to see that they're applying the principles of research that they are seeing in the text or in the literature. At 4th year level, that number goes up, and obviously at master's and doctoral level, that number goes up. Okay, we want to see that you are able to jump from the prescribed sources to other sources that might be relevant to show that you can read. Because remember, with the prescribed sources, you get notes and slides and summaries, but now we're asking you to look for something else that shows that you actually have a deeper understanding of the topic. So yeah, for a third year essay, 2 or 3 good, strong sources, academic sources, not newspaper articles or a conversation with your grandparents. If the writing assignment provides questions that should be answered in the essay, can that be used to facilitate the logical flow of the argument? Absolutely. So the easiest assignments are the ones where you have been given the topic, because those are the parameters within which you need to stay. Okay, if you're given a topic about prescription, then you should not be writing an essay on, let's say, the statute of limitations or amnesty or something else. You need to stick to the topic. So one of the most important things about focus is that in the case of an assignment, the focus is given to you by the assignment itself. But in the more open-ended essays, then you need to discipline yourself by focusing your topic yourself, by identifying one specific topic. Remember, there are a million things you might want to say about a topic, but what is the thing most important for research that you want to say? And that's that's what you need to look at. That's very related or closely related to the question on golden thread. The golden thread it's the route to a place. There are only a few ways to get to a certain place. If you're going, say, to the Grove Mall, you need to use Linwood Road, right? If you use other roads, that's also fine. But at some point, you might get stuck if you're using roads that you don't know. So the golden thread is the setting up or unfoldment of the argument in its proper direction. If you find yourself going on a tangent, you need to stop. And that's why at master's or doctoral level, there's a research proposal, because you can go back to the research proposal and see what your aim was with this project or this written work. And then go back and ask yourself, does this piece of information apply? Is it relevant? Is it necessary? What does it add? So when you look at your work, you need to ask yourself, what does this add to the main research problem? How does it advance the argument that I'm making? And is it still going in the same direction as I said I would be going in the introduction? So once you see yourself getting lost, then you know it's time to stop. Either it means you don't have enough information, so you're waffling and you're adding other things, you're padding, you're filling pages. So you need to stop and say, maybe I need to do more reading on this topic. Or I need to go back to my planning, my drawing board, to see at what point I have taken the wrong turn. And that's where you make sure you maintain a golden thread. There's no argument without a golden thread. There might be a million things you want to say about a topic, but you need to stick to the topic that you have chosen, because that's how you make a good contribution to scholarship. For those of you who are planning an academic career, you cannot address every single issue in your field in one article or in one essay. So choose wisely where you want to start, and then build with other written works the other concerns that you have, right? So be careful of either a topic that's too big or a topic that's too vague, because both of these are going to destroy your golden thread, and you're going to just find yourself typing all sorts of things. Learn to listen to your writing voice. So one of the things that I tell my students is read your work out loud. Read your final draft of something before you submit it to your supervisor or your examiner or whatever. Read the whole thing out loud. I mean that even with a long dissertation. Read every single word. And if you can hear that this is awkward or it's not making sense or it's going in a weird direction, then that's a sign that you need to go back to the drawing board and realign your study to make sure that it is consistent with the main central idea or the main thesis or the main research problem of the study. I hope that that answers the questions. I don't know if I've missed any questions, but those are the ones I have picked up.
We'd like to wrap things up now. So on behalf of Legal Shebeen, I would truly like to say thank you very much for your time and the knowledge that you have imparted on us, Prof. The recording of the video will be made accessible on our YouTube channel. You can just follow us at The Legal Shebeen, and please do follow us on our various social medias at The Legal Shebeen to keep up with our upcoming events. And please do feel free to DM us if you have any more questions. Once again, thank you so much, Prof. Modiri, for your time.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good evening and good luck with your studies.